I'll do this. So we're going to start the last session. I guess they've not lined. There we go. One more session. For some of you, been here 2.5 days, and others have been here for feels like an entire week. But I think we're going to finish with both an interesting and educational, and I hope an inspiring last session. So it's a great pleasure for me, A, to put my glasses on, B, to introduce Susan Gregurick, who was appointed the Associate Director for Data Science and the Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy at the National Institutes of Health on September 16, 2019. Under Dr. Gregurick's leadership, ODSS leads the implementation of the NIH Strategic Plan for Data Science through scientific, technical, and operational collaboration with the institutes, centers, and offices that comprise the complex National Institutes of Health. Dr. Gregurick received the 2020 Leadership in Biological Sciences Award from Washington Academy of Sciences for her work in this role, and she was instrumental in the creation of ODSS in 2018 as a senior advisor before assuming her current position. Susan.
Oops, that's cool. Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much for sticking it out. I know that there's a lot of cool stuff to do here in San Francisco, and I'm just really pleased to be able to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing and some of the vision we have to catalyze data science research through collaborations. But I think maybe this is going to be the button. Nope. This is. Okay. Where do I point it? Why is it not working? Okay, this is the button, right? Oh, there it is. Aha. It's a little delayed, but I think maybe you would agree, and certainly listening to the talks over the last few days, and my basic understanding of genomic sciences. I'm not trained as a genomic scientist. I'm actually trained as a computer scientist in a totally different field. That really, you guys catalyze research through innovations. You guys are the innovators. You're the scaffolds of information. We layer all of our information about proteins, about networks, about pathways, and now about our clinical outcomes, maybe even our social determinants of health. Who knows where we're going to go on genomics. So you guys are really the innovators. You're the next generation of thought and innovation. So let me start at the end. Instead of showing you my last slide I'll show you my last slide first, which is really an invitation, and thank you, Valentina, for the suggestion, to talk about where we're going to go in the next 5 years. So the most important thing is the thing that's on probably everybody's mind, whether you're here today or listening online, is our NIH policy for data management and data sharing. It sounds like a big ask. Share your data. Tell us how you're going to manage it. We need to improve our capabilities to sustain this policy and to help researchers and to help NIH program staff actually work with this policy to make it happen. And why? Why is this important? Because data is a renewable resource. It's a gift we give our grandchildren. So give the gift and share data, but let's share it in a thoughtful and reusable way. Second goal, enhancing human data for research. And there's 3 words. Participatory participant research. Engaging participants and patients in research is something that we need to do because contributing data from where they are to us makes the whole enterprise work faster, better, and more efficient, as we heard from our speaker today, Patrick. Of course, I'm somebody who developed software, so supporting opportunities in software engineering, sustainable research in software is a goal of mine and a goal of NIH's, but also our new ideas in artificial intelligence. Harnessing foundational models like large language models for data curation is going to improve data and improve our work tremendously. I'm going to talk today about the 4th goal, which is supporting a federated biomedical data infrastructure and why that's important, not just for GA4GH, but for NIH and for all of us. And finally, strengthening a broader community of people who can use and can be literate in data science. So that's where we're going. But first, let me just tell you what I think we'll talk about today, which is a little bit of introduction into the office and what we do. Then I want to tell you the story of the cloud and the impact that that's made. Then I want to tell you how you can leverage the cloud to federate data platforms. It doesn't have to be the cloud. I'm a big proponent of hybrid computing, but this is where we're going to start. And then I'll tell you about how we can work together in building a relationship with GA4GH and others. So I'm a small office in the office of the director, and many of you probably know the OD and Deep Poughkeepsie through the Common Fund, but there's actually 14 offices there. All of us do transformative and catalytic work, but we do it by coordinating and collaborating across the NIH and our 27 institute centers and offices. And I do it to provide leadership and coordination on data science and related activities, to develop and really realize a modern and integrated biomedical data ecosystem, to enhance a diverse and talented data workforce, and to build strategic partnerships and relationships just like the one we're having today. And I'm so glad that I'm here, and I'm super glad also that my colleagues are here. So I want to show you this slide to give you a sense of what happens at NIH when you are looking at a catalytic office. Our budget in 2022 is $70 million, and 63 of that $1 million is reinvested in NIH through our institute centers and offices. And you can see that most, if not all, of the institutes and centers are represented here. And two really probably stick out to you. CIT, that's our Center for Information Technology, and NLM, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So why such big budgets there? Well, through CIT, our office supports strides in our partnerships with cloud service providers and all of the downstream capabilities that provides. That's what we do. Through NLM, we are the supporters of SRA sequence archive. We support the data storage and the capabilities of SRA, as well as dbGaP and modernization of dbGaP, the CDE data repository, and other activities with the extramural community. So those two institutes and centers really are developing a lot of fundamental infrastructure data science, and I'll get to that and show you why and what's happening with that in a moment. But you can see our focus areas are in artificial intelligence, enhancing data infrastructure, supporting data sharing, analytic tools, and developing a workforce. So sometimes when you're going to make a change, it sort of looks like you're standing at the bottom of California Avenue, and you're kind of looking up, and I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. I'm a flatlander, and this is really intimidating to me personally, and just thinking about lugging the suitcase up that hill. But you guys have these lovely cable cars, and by the way, there's a cable car museum just 3 blocks down the road. Lovely place. Just like having that cable that you latch onto and drive up the hill. I have over 140 colleagues at NIH who work with me and do a lot of heavy lifting. And I can't thank them enough, in particular the folks who are here today in the room. It's through collaboration and coordination and through their efforts that we actually get up those hills. And that's how we really make a difference. It's absolutely not one person who's doing all this work. It's a lot of people and a lot of effort. And for that, I'm forever grateful. So let me just quickly show you what we've done in the last few years. We have not only engaged with our cloud service providers, we've put 248 petabytes of data on the cloud, you'll see that in a minute, and now we have a cloud lab, a training sandbox environment where you can try cloud, you can learn through modules that we developed, and you can do that for free. And so far, since June 23rd, my birthday, we have over 200 trainees from across institutes in academic and in NIH working in the cloud lab. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the work we're doing in single sign-on. Supporting that data management and sharing policy is super important across the team, including a data management center of excellence that really is working with our NIH program staff on how you actually evaluate and work with data management plans. So that's a training activity and a best practices activity. There's the DataWorks Prize, which I had over 100 applicants and 11 awardees for a total of $500,000 last year, and we have it again this year. There's the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, really knitting together those generalist repositories to work on best practices, developing common metadata, as well as metrics. And then there's DataCite. We have an umbrella organization with DataCite so that any of our NIH repositories can mint DOIs, super important for data citation. I am very fond of software, so we support over 100 software supplements for sustainability, to port those software to the cloud, to bring on new modules, and to really look at how you can re-engineer academic software so that you can, like Dan Katz said, bridge the gap between academic and industry software. we support colleagues such as yourself to come to NIH for a 1 to 2 year sabbatical and work with the Institute centers and offices on really important things like data harmonization, artificial intelligence, and integrating ophthalmic data with electronic healthcare record data, for example. And we partner with NSF on a number of activities, including the Smart and Connected Health. So that's just a few of the many, many things that we've done with the $63 million that Congress gave us last year. So now I want to tell you the story of the cloud. So I joined the Department of Energy way back in 2009 with the mandate to create a way for the Biological and Environmental Directorate to share data and to analyze data. And so I did what would normally happen. I talked to the national labs, and then I talked to NSF's iPlant, because that's what Cybers was called back then, and Karen Combe, to figure out what iPlant was doing. And then I decided to look and see what NIH was doing in CA Big. And then I read a number of papers, and this one in particular really stood out to me. It's The Case for Cloud Computing and Genomics Informatics by Lincoln Stein, who's sitting over there. And I have to tell you that nothing changed my life more than reading that paper, because immediately I understood exactly what we could do if we put all that biological data, not just genomic data, but proteomic data, at that time it was microarray data, imaging data, pathway data, in the cloud, and actually made it computable for other researchers. Now, can you imagine the uphill battle of talking to a traditional HPC Department of Energy colleagues about, I want to change your architecture. I want you to think about graphic processing units, GPUs, and I want you to really think about what we could do with large memory compute. And it was not well received initially, but over the past 13 or so years, I can see that it's made a huge difference in the way that the Department of Energy is approaching computing. And it's not just me who was saying this, there were others there too, but this is really where I saw the importance of the way that biologists work with data, which is in real time, it's interactive, and it's big. And so with that, we come to my next favorite quote from David Glazer, which is, just imagine what you could do if we put petabytes of data in the cloud. Imagine the patterns you could find, or the markers for disease and the prediction and causality. And boy, will that come true now that we have large language models working in the cloud. And so this reminds me of a conversation we had just a few days ago about, well, it's really great that we're putting all this data in the cloud, but if we're not actually collecting it with its future research in mind, what's the point? And I think I got it mostly right because it was happy hour, so I had to put that down there. But it's really true. And so this is a shout out. This is my shout out now to Alistair to say, where's some real innovation that's going to happen? Probably in this space, probably in large language models for data. And so no research I've ever met is a one-hit wonder. You all have amazing ideas and they just keep coming. So now you can feed them all to Tanya and Alistair, and we'll pick up some really cool things. But I have to say that what we're going to do is going to look a little bit like not invented here, but trust me, it will be innovative. But first, let me just point out what we have done with those partnerships with Google and AWS and Microsoft. With over 248 petabytes in the cloud, it's really seeing David's vision come true in ways that probably none of us could have ever imagined. There's no way I could have told NIH leadership in 2018, we're going to have 100 petabytes in the cloud in a few years. They would have said no. But in fact, it's really true. What I'd love to see is where we can go with these partnerships with the cloud service providers, and I think we're looking at ways in which we can innovate on large language models and secure enclaves, for example, and other really cool things and other partners. So this is a space to keep watching for innovation. And like I said, data is a renewable resource. It's the gift that will be there for our grandchildren if we do it right. And you can see the types of data that we have in the cloud. It's quite massive. Genomics data, microbiome, neuroimaging, single-cell omics, cryo-EM, another big favorite of mine, all kinds of things. But the image also sort of points to the fact that it's sort of like oil, right? It's like a resource, but just like crude oil, it needs an infrastructure. We actually have to build something to extract the data, to refine it, make it useful, and then to distribute its products. And this is actually a conversation I had just last week with Louis Nunes Emerald from Northwestern about the fact that it's great that you have all this data, but you have to build a lot of infrastructure there, and boy, do we know it. So the challenge really for us is that it is truly a computational problem to think about search and discovery of petabytes, over 100 petabytes of data on the cloud. This is no small thing. And to do that at the scale where NIH sits is definitely no small thing. These data are heterogeneous. They don't have the same metadata. Constructing even a large language model on this will not be easy, but it is a challenge that's worth pursuing. More complicated for us, we fund over 300 different types of data repositories that store and share data. 80 of those at least are supporting human holdings, so that's all controlled access data. So now we're going to see some interesting challenges, because we know that we have a lot of data and a lot of data sets. We know that it's a struggle for researchers to find, in some cases, to access data, to aggregate it, and then do co-analysis of data. Regardless of where that data sits, it's going to be a little easier if it's in the cloud, but that's not, necessarily a given. And so integrating all of our different NIH systems tends to be bespoke. I'm sure that you're all familiar with that. And so how can we make that a better process? That's sort of where my office sits. So in other words, how can we bridge the data and the platforms and the analysis together in a meaningful way when we're looking at so many different partners and so many different data resources? It's kind of like building a house in some ways. We all have sort of fair and care data of various sizes and shapes, different types of databases and knowledge bases. We all want to have similar doors and windows or identity and access management. We all want to link our data and databases through, for example, networking, or in this case for houses, wireless. Where do we compete? On design elements, on analytics and computing, on visualization. And who are end users? The research community. They live in the houses, but you want to visit each other's houses. Sometimes you want to have dinner. You might want to take a plate home, or maybe you'll just have dinner and leave, but we all do want to visit each other's houses just like we want to visit each other's data resources. So it's a lofty goal to search and discover fair data in a flexible way that will scale, to access multiple different data sets across different systems where there's going to be different security or different access protocols or processes with the assurance that we need to abide by for security. We want to certainly do analytics in familiar platforms, but be flexible for collaborations and for new methods to be adopted. And importantly for us at NIH and for those dealing with human data, to include bias detection to make sure that we're fair and transparent. We want to display results that can be incorporated in public data sets, reports, and cite the data and the tools. And of course, most importantly, we want to support the next generation of folks. We have a lot of data systems at NIH. We have a very robust foundation. I'm just listing a few here because I work with these very, very directly, but actually you'll see in a minute that I work with many different data resources. So I'm just giving a shout out to the folks who are part of some of our early pilots in interoperability. So the first problem statement that we encounter is the fact that we've all developed really robust systems. Many of these are now in the cloud, but we all have slightly different ways of opening the door, different protocols. And so if a researcher wants to come in and access data, for example, from Anvil or from Biodata Catalyst, in the Wayback Problem, it would have potentially been a little different and a little bit, it might look the same to a researcher, but the back-end protocol might have been different, and that's sort of a problem statement. And if you think about the fact that we have about 80 controlled access data repositories, with each are implementing their own identity and access management system, that's kind of a hard problem to solve. We have to start somewhere. And so, oops, sorry. I don't know why it did that. So one of the first things that we tackled was, just making the doors similar so that we could all enter with similar keys, and that the keys would be known, and that people could get the keys easily. And so this is the story of researcher auth services. It's a way to just streamline researchers who want to use data across different systems to be able to access the data from both repository X, for example, and repository Y, and bring it into one of their familiar repositories and compute on it. It seems like it should be a pretty easy problem to solve, but in fact, it's really quite hard. It requires a lot of coordination and collaboration, not only across NIH, but certainly across organizations, and importantly with GA4GH. So this started about 20 2020 in partnership with GA4GH to really implement some of your standards that you had in passports, identity and access management, so that we could just essentially make it login once and use across multiple different repositories, so that researchers could use the passports that they have that shows which data they have access to across many different repositories, and be flexible enough to include different identity providers such as login.gov or ERA Commons or in Common or even your Google ID. And so this is just sort of a way to give you a sense of what some of this identity and authorization broker looks like. It's just to give you a sense that we are using a lot of different brokers in Commons, Login, ERA Commons to manage access. And now this gives you a sense of the scale of where we are. So the take-home message is that we have a lot of data systems that are integrating to use the same type of identity and access management or researcher auth services across NIH. More than 80 potential, and here about 30 actual. And it also gives you a sense of where the real bottleneck is, which is sort of a my problem thing, in terms of going from the initial conversations through the design phase and actually getting this done. It's really a lot of work. It's a lot of work for the systems, it's a lot of work for NIH, but in the end, the goal is that it'll be useful, that you can actually navigate across all of our biomedical data repositories that have secure access in a consistent and streamlined way, and that will build on additional capabilities like search and discovery and analytics that we hope to get to. So what are some of our ongoing priorities? Well, we have a lot of complicated things. For example, we have a brick system that's 7 bricks across 7 different institutes and 3 new ones, and we have to develop a protocol that will work for all 7 at the same time. We have to expand our current protocols on genomic access to non-genomic data, also a challenge. We have to support new login accounts and new credentialing systems that go beyond ERA Commons and login.gov and in Common. We have to, and for my team, we have to really think about how to streamline and onboard and integrate that process, because you can see exactly where the bottleneck is, and that's something that we're trying to work on. And then we have to make sure that we adhere to the cybersecurity protocols of the administration and follow the guidance of 2022 in terms of multi-factor authentication and other security guidance, as well as the guidance of our security advisory group. So sometimes things happen slowly or they don't happen like you think, and there's often many reasons, and some of them are the fact that this all is back-ended in the Center for Information Technology, and that we have to comply with our NIH security protocol. So sometimes that's why it looks a little more challenging. And now I want to spend some time and talk to you about how we can build on that researcher auth services to really build more through our cloud-based ecosystem. And this is a story of 5 different data platforms: Biodata Catalyst, Kids First, the NLM through dbGaP and SRA, the Cancer Research Data Commons, and Anvil. And while it will look like a top-down initiative, it's actually just the opposite. The systems themselves and the system owners at NIH dictate exactly what will happen in NCPI. In my office, we're the facilitators and the funders, but this is really meant to be a bottom-up approach to look at interoperability rather than a top-down approach. And why would we do that? Because really enabling a way to distribute data, to share it, and to compute on it will make that realization that we heard about Patrick speak about actually happen. Of course, we need to do more, but this is a first step. Empowering researchers to seamlessly co-analyze data across different platforms and eventually across different clouds or in hybrid computing is the future of where data science is going. I'm really pleased to tell you that we do have a coordination center. It's funded at about $16 million with $500,000 from NHGRI. Thank you very much. And what do? They facilitate, they monitor, and they establish the implementation projects and the guidelines for how we move forward. They provide project management and coordination throughout the whole system. They will support training and outreach to bring in new people and new researchers. They will provide the support for a governance structure, and they will facilitate and monitor one of our harder projects, which is just getting us all in the same door. What do we hope to do with interoperability? This is a tech slide, and I'm going to show you what it looks like from the science side, but really it's search and discovery across our different platforms. executing the same workflow on different platforms to validate the equivalency, testing new IT standards like those developed by GA4GH, and why this relationship is so important to NIH is because we can be your driver project tester. Creating resources to estimate cloud costs, boy, is that a big one. And while CloudLog can help with that, NCPI can really fast forward those cloud estimations as well as testing new architectures in the cloud, and then improving our semantic and semantic interoperability. Some examples of what we've done through NCPI includes the research raw services that I described, but also our partnership with GA4GH and DERSC. We do implement DERSC, and we're able to drive some of that technology forward, not just for these 4 or 5 platforms that I'm telling you about, but there's 80 behind them. So that's the impact. I'm a big proponent of fast healthcare interoperable resources, or FHIR. Why is that important? Because all of our health IT systems are using FHIR to basically serve data to clinicians and to patients through patient portals. If we can link that basic research and genomic data into FHIR, we have an easy entry into making what Patrick said actually happen. Because whether or not we are today, we will all be patients, we will all access our healthcare systems, and integrating our data into our healthcare data and vice versa, integrating that into the research program is really a win. And in my opinion, and I know Bob will agree, that this is just not an easy lift to put up a FHIR server, but it is super important to sort of lower that barrier. And we've been doing that through training through our CTSRs in idea states to really try to figure out how can we lower that tech barrier for those folks. And finally, a shout out to Bob Grossman on the portable format in bioinformatics. It's really a great way that allows us to exchange controlled vocabulary and data and schema so that we can actually share data in a meaningful way and compute on it. So there's a lot of great technology that's being developed here in GA4GH and through partners, and you're a convener of that, and for that, the impact will be multiplied at NIH. But it's not just a tech program. Really, I've grown up in a world of co-design. And so in co-design, you have to have a science driver that drives the technology, and the technology feeds back to the science driver. It's like an interactive basketball where we're passing balls back and forth between researchers and tech developers and researchers, and hopefully with patients, so that we can move the game forward in a meaningful way. And here, these are the science drivers from NCPI from a year or 2 ago. The new ones will be released soon, but genetic basis for congenital heart defects, line 1 retroposon expression, and looking at normal versus those who have the expression, and sex is a biological variable. So what do we hope to do with NCPI? To enable a federated data ecosystem that really drives analytics and data science, that tests and implements standards as those developed by GA4GH, and to really think about systems interoperability in a scale that's quite big, to look at tech cohesion and across participating platforms, and to empower researchers, because in the end, that's really the goal, is to empower researchers to use our data in more meaningful ways and then contribute back. What will we do in the future? We're absolutely going to enhance our cloud platforms in strides, but I think you'll see a lot of expansion to hybrid computing, to edge computing. I work on an interagency group that's really thinking about what is the next type of computing that will be available for not just researchers, but for folks in transportation, for example. We're looking at supporting efficiencies and shareable technologies across our NIH data platforms through partnerships like GA4GH. We want to make sure that we have researchers' ability to access data and to ensure accountabilities for privacy protection and cybersecurities, and at the same time enable that participant process through participant consent. And we want to ensure that we have a robust and connected data ecosystem that really builds on NCPI and developing new capabilities for search and discovery, such as those that you might see from large language models or others. So strengthening the relationships between NIH and GA4GH is really what brings many of us here today, and certainly for me. We have long-standing activities in GA4GH. Many of our staff are very, very dedicated to GA4GH, and they work with us on driver projects, and I'll show you those in a moment. Many of our NIH-funded projects are engaging in developing and testing GA4GH standards. Our staff and our investigators participate in a number of GA4GH work streams. We are a member and a funder of GA4GH through the U24, through NHGRI, and we work together internally in NIH to coordinate our activities with GA4GH. Some of our driver projects include not just NCPI, but also all of us, the BRCA Challenge. So I imagine that you will see probably more driver projects in the future, and that's probably a good thing. What can we do to amplify and build a stronger partnership with GA4GH, including our contributions to the standards development that you will do to enhance and explore appropriate implementations of those standards, to facilitate our interactions in a more meaningful way, and identify technical and policy issues that driver projects could address, and to increase awareness of GA4GH across NIH is super important, and to promote diverse technology and policy representation from NIH at GA4GH activities. These are just some ideas that we're thinking about for your consideration. And with that, and with 1 minute to close, I just want to give a shout out to all of those here in the room and who may not be for their work in our NIH and GA4GH team. And the best thing about riding the trolley car up the hill is the down. It's so amazing, and it would not be as much fun if I didn't have all these guys in the car with me. And with that, thank you so much for inviting me. It's just a total pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Susan. And I think whether you're in the US or globally, the importance of NIH data and the ability to access it and collaborate is significant for everybody in the room. Questions? So there you go. Susan, great presentation. How does the NIH plan for the amount of cloud compute and storage that will be needed on the back end of these? How does the NIH?
How do we plan for it? That is a great question, because you don't know how much data people are going to be producing in the future, but certainly our data management and sharing policy tells me that there's an awful lot of dark data out there that researchers are now going to think about sharing, and very likely they're going to look to many different types of solutions, including the cloud. And so we will be closely monitoring what's happening with our data management plan. We do try to estimate based on how people are using the data over the past year or so, and actually we do this on a monthly basis, and trust me, we are looking at how people are using data. I get those reports, and so that's for us the way that moving forward, but of course, this is going to scale on that will bring more data to the cloud, and also will make us really think about ways of data compression and data indexing in much more meaningful ways, because 248 petabytes of data is a lot of data, and that's also a lot of money.
I was struck when you put the paper from Lincoln up from 2010 that 2 years later, we still struggle to find any examples of genomic data in the cloud. And at that point, NIH was expressly forbidding its data in the cloud. So it took a while, but we have come a long way.
It's just a note that those little seeds can bear big forest. So when you publish a paper, somebody's reading it, and it might just spur the next person to think about how to change the ecosystem.
Yeah. So next question, will you allow European, e.g. Elixir, identities to be accepted in the RAS authorization process, or will researchers always have to have an ERA or a US identity?
Actually, no, they will not always have to have ERA Commons access. We've been working with all of us to actually facilitate how do we bring European identities into RAS, and so that is something that we're working on. I'm not entirely sure it will be through Elixir, but we are absolutely working on that. And why? Because it's really important for the All of Us program that their international partners can come in to their systems using RAS. So yes, we will absolutely be working on this.
Yeah, and I think David's question down at the bottom is on the same lines, but he's certainly broadening it to the whole globe and talking about other groups. So I think it's the same answer, but just the message. I think international researchers want to interoperate just as much. Let's take this one at the top. How would you foresee the transparency and connection between data consent and research results?
Actually, that's a really great question. I've been working with Monica Bertinelli from NCI, who might actually become our next NIH director, on exactly this problem, on computable consent, and how can we make it easier for participants or patients to give consent really easily, quickly understood, that can be automatically piped into the back end of our data platforms. And I think that you'll see some work there, and And it's really going to take a concerted effort between NIH, between HHS, and between ONC and the healthcare systems to make that linkage between consent and research actually a reality. But this is something that many of us care very deeply about.
Okay. We'll switch to the anonymous question. So it starts with excellent talk, and now it's going to move up, so I now know. Oh, no. There you go. Excellent talk. How do you think GA4GH can help standardize how users pay to access data on the cloud, like requested pays buckets, or how providers can pay to host data in special use cases?
That is an excellent question, and I think there's a lot that GA4GH could do there in terms of how we can structure the payer system. This is something that we work with each of our cloud service providers on, and I want to just thank Amazon and Google and Microsoft Azure because they do provide free data storage for a number of our data assets, and so that also helps a lot. But I do think that there's an opportunity there for GA4GH to look at not just how we're working in the cloud, but how we can actually facilitate an easier pay system. This has been somewhat of a challenge for some of our systems.
I see David's getting more upvotes than anybody else, so let's go with the number 4 upvote. Okay. If you could pick a single new GA4GH standard or new feature of an existing standard to see live in 2024, what would it be?
For me, I'm not sure if this is innovative or standard, but for me, it's the search. For me, that's where the big payoff really is right now. And I don't know if that's a standard or not, to tell you the truth, but that's where I see we could add value to researchers and potentially for other people who want to access data is really facilitating that data discovery. And I meant it so much that I partnered with NSF on, unfortunately has the same name, their Fabric system, which is an open knowledge network that's meant to be broad, not just in the cloud, but broad across data systems. We're working on the medical one, medical being mostly biological medical, not necessarily clinical medical, to think about how you can really incentivize and innovate on knowledge networks. It didn't have a lot of large language models embedded in that concept, but I think that's where we could go. Where the standard is sort of maybe GA4GH would be able to help with that.
I mean, certainly when it comes to search, our dominant protocol over the last 10 years actually was started by Jim Ostell from NCBI by creating the concept of Beacon, and it's stuck with us ever since. And I think colleagues, particularly in Europe, have done great work to build beacon networks and want to do more.
I think there might be something there, especially if we look at what's happening in the NSF and maybe the ARPA space.
Yeah. I saw one in the, well, we got one from Heidi, but I saw one on a patient advocacy. So can we go to that one? How can NIH incorporate patient advocates more effectively, especially regarding privacy and contribution?
I can tell you the story about Aim Ahead, which is not talked about here, but it's our artificial intelligence machine learning to bring AI technology and AI researchers to underserved populations, but most importantly to bring underserved populations to AI, both in training as well as in advocacy. And one of the things that I really love about Aim Ahead is that they go right into the communities where people are really quite advocate about things like diabetes and metabolic disease in African Americans, for example. And so bringing them into the program, they are part of the research program. They help develop or they co-design what we're going to do, and then they sit on our executive board so that we hear feedback on what we are doing. And I see that trend happening at NIH, really not just having advocacy sit on our boards, but having them embedded in the actual design of the experiments so that there's a direct feedback. And so that's sort of what we take co-design to the extreme, is sit with us and work with us and help us develop the science.
Okay, we're going to elevate the one with 7 votes. I wonder if you can comment on the future of integrating data for environmental, social determinants of health, and you like that one?
Yeah, I totally do, because it's totally a whole section in the strategic plan about, and this is happening, and there are 2 ICs who are really pushing this forward, the Nursing Institute and the Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, to integrate social determinants of health into our common data models and our common data elements, bringing those 2 fields together. They're working mostly on social determinants. The Environmental Health Institute is working on environmental health determinants. Bringing those together into our sort of standard lexicon of data models is really where we're going to start to push that. And that will help the integration of those social determinants surveys, for example, into some of the work that we're doing in genomics data. And there's really great ways to embed information into the sort of scaffold of the genome. I think if we ever thought about doing that, it would be pretty cool.
So I think we've got time, because you're answering these questions so succinctly, we're plowing through them. But this one might tie you up for a while. What's more difficult, developing interoperability across NIH or convincing groups to interoperate?
Convincing groups to interoperate. That's the standing at the bottom and looking up the big hill. But I pushed those rocks up the hill for large memory compute at DOE. I wasn't the only one by far, but I had a pretty loud voice at that time that this was the future, and it was because of Lincoln. So, woohoo! And I think that it's really the convincing. The culture change is always the hardest thing. The technology is the easier part of all this because it's the fun part. The culture change is the harder part.
Okay, you can see somebody's obviously there's a lot of ooze. There's a lot of ooze in there. So Raz needs to be quicker, I guess.
It does. We kind of know that. But thank you for telling us. Yes, it is the bane of my office is to try to make this easier. It's a combination of working with cybersecurity folks and platforms and getting common lexicon and common understandings that makes it hard. And we probably made it harder than it needs to be, so apologies on my end, for sure. I think there's a lot of good lessons there learned that many people can take away for the next tech development.
Let's wrap up with the question about how does ODSS effort tie to ARPA-H that Alistair presented earlier?
Oh, it totally ties. Alistair's my friend. And I miss him, and I really wish it's a bittersweet thing. Like, I really miss him not being in NHLBI, and I'm super glad that there's somebody at ARPA-H like Alistair who can actually, talk back and forth with us. A lot of what they're going to do in ARPA-H is truly going to be innovative technologies. All the things that are looking really promising are going to come back. They'll probably come back through my office. They'll come back through cancer. They'll come back through the ICs, and then we'll be able to integrate that in. So they're de-risking a lot of stuff for us, and people will give them really great ideas, and we'll take those great ideas and build on them in the future. And they'll do something else that's great. It works really great for DARPA. I was involved in the ARPA-E for energy. I know what the benefit can be, and I know how hard it can be to get that done.
So, as always, if questions have not been answered live, we'll be answering them, I think, through the Slack channel, or we'll be asking our presenters to answer them and work with us on it. But Susan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oops. Let's go with the big green button. So the next section is going to be a little bit of a fun look and a very personal look at GA4GH leadership, past, present, and future. And while Heidi and Ewan are making their way to their fireside chat, we have some earlier leadership messages from Tom Hudson and David Altshuler. David is the first chair, now at Vertex. Tom, the second chair of GA4GH, now at AbbVie.
Uh-oh. No sound.
I'm not in charge of volume. Who's the second chair?
Play them at the end.
So I was going to say, why don't we, unless it works this time. No. Okay, why don't we take this offline? We'll switch order. I'll just ask Heidi and Ewan to go straight into their conversation, and then hopefully we'll fix this little glitch while you're doing it. By way of introduction, that one's Ewan, this one's Heidi. Okay, over to you guys.
Great. So I think I get to start
Yeah,
out
apparently so.
interviewing you, and then you get to interview me, but we can have a dialogue here. So Ewan, first I just want to say thank you for I can't believe it's been 7 years since you've stepped into this role. You've been transformational for Global Alliance, and on behalf of all of us here and online, thank you for all you've done for Global Alliance. We have come so far, and seeing all the talks across Connect and Plenary has just demonstrated how far we've come. But I also know that you have more you want to do and want to see happen within Global Alliance. So I wonder if you could just share sort of your reflections and kind of what you still see that you want to get done or see happen as you're still engaged.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting, and it's been wonderful working with everybody here in this community. I think standards are quite an interesting beast. There's often a point where a standard is thought about and then not used, and there are early adopters. And then there's also a period where a standard is widely used, and so widely used that people forget about it. And there's actually quite a small gap in the middle where the standard is kind of half used, half not used. And so when I think about some of the things, it actually brings I get a real sense of joy seeing cram, by the way, when it's written up. We're going to store the crams here and there. For the people who don't know, there was the kind of fundamental research for the compression came from my research group back in 2011. And so that makes me kind of sing. Seeing all those standards being used across the board. There are the kind of standards that we almost inherited or we took over, CRAM, BAM, VCF. We also have inherited BED, and those have powered genomics for so long. But they're the standards that really came out through the GA4GH process, like the passports and DERS. And one of the wonderful things at this meeting was just seeing people really use those, really deploy and use. Now, it's a frustration that even in my own group, we've got a GA4GH compatible workflow that uses DERS, that could do the right thing. We have yet to actually use it in anger in anybody's environment. And that frustrates me. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, we've run the code at the EBI, we've run the code in Genomics England, we've run the code in test data sets in Terra, but we've never actually used the GA4GH compatible basis of the code somewhere else. And I really want to achieve that in my own sort of research world and move to having proper GA4GH compatible environments everywhere. And I feel like I've got more influence or more advocacy in Europe, though sometimes I wonder myself these things where it's the most. So I feel like that's the place I'd really like to make those things happen. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I think our ask was to come to this community and help make standards for this federated future. We've now got to shift our ask to coming to this community and help implement these standards to make this future that we know we want to have. So that is, I think, the shift that I want to still be part of, even if I'm not chair.
Great, which actually brings me to my second question, which is around that balance between developing the standards versus the implementation. And obviously the main focus of Global Alliance is in standards development, but we also know through our strategic refresh that we really need to focus on the implementation side. But it's a balance. It takes up resources to work on implementation, and how deeply do we try to facilitate that? And so I wonder if you could comment from your perspective, how to strike that right balance and how deeply we need or should focus on supporting the implementation, and in what ways? Are we just conveners? Do we also facilitate granting? You know, how do we engage in that way that helps get our standards used but doesn't prevent us from developing new standards that are still needed?
I'm looking forward to the wise leadership that you're going to be showing in this area, because I don't think there's a simple path. I think everybody knows that good standards are divorced of the implementation, and they're divorced of the kind of location or where they're run, who they're run by, whether they're closed or open, whether they're charged for or homebrew or what have you. And I think those standards that's the best way to have standards. But I think it really is true that we've kind of got an activation energy, and we've got a community which has a lot of priorities, very validly, in both research and healthcare. And so sort of inserting ourselves to make this future in that priority stack, I've seen it challenging, my own organization, EBI. I've seen it challenging at Genomics England. I've seen it challenging these very practical things. What I don't think we should kid ourselves is that, what we're not going to be doing is kind of implementing, actually being the data holders, the data stewards, the people who actually run the data scale. And a lot of this is about putting that scale of data alongside these implementations, where I think your wise view about, that kind of, are we convening, are we catalyzing, are we doing on the software implementations, I think that there's going to be a balance to be struck about how we handle that.
Great.
And I look forward to your balancing act.
Excellent. So another question I have for you, and something I've been thinking about for the last bit, is how we think about endorsement of other standards. Obviously we've recognized that we operate in certain domains, and there are other groups, standards organizations that operate in other domains, but it's not always clear when we are saying that's fit for purpose and an extension of something that we're doing, and we endorse it and want to use it because it's synergistic with what we're working on too, versus we haven't looked at it, or we aren't playing with them, or even an assumption that we're competing with other groups that has been mentioned. So do you think it's worth our while to actually go through a formal endorsement or designation of other standards to say, we think this standard is useful and synergistic with work we are doing, and have them up on our website and designated as such, so that others in the community can sort of see a wider suite and things that our expert communities have said are also useful? So
I think there's a lot of implicit endorsement / building on a kind of stack. So there's often a technology stack that we're building on, which are these kind of internet standards and web standards, which we're applying. I think Passports is really interesting because it was making use of parts of the federated authorization infrastructure, which has been around for a long time. We're actually a kind of a use case for that world for the first time. I think we have these kind of peer standards organizations, most obviously HL7. Perhaps the relationship of us to the proteomics standards group would be another in the research domain. And again, I think the approach that we've taken of forming joint kind of spaces and arrangements, I think that's a good way to do that. Sometimes you have to therefore go twice as slowly to get the thing through that, but that's appropriate. Do we need an endorsement process for other things? So we certainly got to communicate clearly. Quite how formalized we have to make that clear communication, I don't know. And I think we should be quite driven by what are the blockers for people. I do think quite a lot of this is emphasizing that we know that GA4GH knows what it feels its domain is. These are the problems that we feel we should solve. And then here's some other problems, and we definitely think they're HL7s, or we definitely think they are someone else's. And communicating our domain and our touch points to other domains, I think is as important as that endorsement or not process.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. By the way, I'm going to turn over to Ewan to start asking me some questions, but I do want to note that we are going to take questions from all of you. So as you sit here and listen to us chat, please put in questions into Slido, because we certainly want to be able to engage all of you in this discussion as well. So Ewan, you're up.
So I thought, Heidi, before I get into how you want to shape GA4GH going forwards, just a little bit about you. You know, you're someone who spans clinic and the research, and I just was curious about kind of what makes you get out of bed in the morning, and you know, is it more clinical delivery? Is it more research? Research creation or research, you know, discovery?
Yeah.
What motivates you?
That's a great question. You know, early in my career, when I was getting my PhD, early on I was fascinated by genetics, but I really appreciated the direct impact of my work on patients and individuals. And that quickly led me to clinical diagnostics as a sort of extension. And I actually sort of, after my PhD and a fairly short postdoc, entered a training program to get into to be a clinical lab director, and sort of focused on that for a while because I could just see that very direct application of my work and my skills on patients. But then fairly soon after that, I just realized how inefficient and ineffective the current clinical laboratory systems were in genetics, because you couldn't interpret variants. No one was sharing data. You were looking up, you know, variants in the literature, and there was very little there. There was just so few standards, and I was just like, we can do this so much better. And that, you know, ultimately led to engaging in some of the first grants I wrote myself, which was later, you know, led to ClinGen. And over time, I've realized that where I can have the biggest impact is often bringing the community together to do things in ways that we can have so much broader an impact on patients than if each lab or each research program operates in silos. And so a lot of that motivation has driven the projects I'm involved in. You know, although I do some basic research or applied research in rare disease gene discovery, that's mostly the area where I do more of the scientific side. You know, that's also we just need to increase the yield of the diagnostic process, and so we have to find more genes. But in every way, it's always me looking at, here's a problem, how can we scale it? And that's fairly quickly where I came to, we need better standards, because you can't scale if you can't interoperate and share data to do that. So, you know, although I am involved in a lot of different things, from Global Alliance, ClinGen, Nomad, Matchmaker Exchange, all of these things, there's a very common theme to them, and that is the ability to just improve the system in terms of scale and accuracy and effectiveness, ultimately to benefit patients. And that is what gets me up every day.
In that, I mean, I actually don't, you know, how that impact on patients, is it kind of the lab report goes out and you know you or your team has done a good job and off it goes? Or, you know, to what extent has it been about following the story even closer to the patient? I mean, has that been a part of your life, or do you feel like job done once the report's out of the door?
Yeah, so early on in my career, I focused on hereditary hearing loss. And in that realm, I had a research study. I worked with an otolaryngologist, Marley Canay, at Children's Hospital, and we had direct patient outreach. And I spent a lot of time interacting with families. You know, us also, we were diagnosing Usher syndrome, which was combined hearing loss and blindness. And we spent a lot of time with the families, listening to them, helping build patient support organizations. You know, one of the first, you know, kids with Usher syndrome I diagnosed was a family who then started a patient support organization, raised money, got all the researchers to collaborate together. And so I've throughout my life spent a lot of time on that patient side. Now we run the Rare Genomes Project at the Broad, and that's a direct patient recruitment. And we work jointly with the patients And sometimes we're returning results that are actually still uncertain, and we're working with them to gather more data, matching with other families through matchmaker exchange, and helping on a journey to solve their disease. And that is still, like, the joy I get from the patient stories. The other day, we ended the diagnostic odyssey of a woman who was 87 years old and had been all her life on an odyssey. And it's just like incredibly rewarding to be able to make a difference in those individuals' lives. So it's still a part of my life. I don't spend as much time talking to patients as I used to, but my team does, and they bring the stories back, and that keeps me and honestly everybody in my team, from the software developers and onward, it motivates us to see the impact of our work, in those lives.
You've always had this, really strong international aspect in the way you've thought about rare disease. You mentioned matchmaker exchange, also your work on Nomad and things like that. How has working with international collaborations changed your perspective, or hasn't it at all? What have you, there's the data, but I'm just curious about, I definitely know there are some really big differences about how we deliver and think about healthcare across the world, and I'd just be interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think my first exposure to that, I was a grad student, and I was studying this family from Costa Rica that had a blindness deafness syndrome called Norrie disease. And so they are born blind, they lose their hearing over time, and they also have a vascular disease that actually leads to peripheral vascular disease, so venous stasis ulcers and sort of a fairly severe phenotype. And so we went down there to study the hearing loss, and brought an audiologist down there with me. But we also, knowing they had this vascular disease, I brought a vascular nurse, and got some donations from some companies of some of the supplies to help with the venous stasis ulcers and other things. Well, when we got there, word got out in the community. It's a very rural community. Word got out that there was a nurse treating vascular disease. And all of a sudden, we had hundreds of people coming out in line to get treatment from this nurse and the supplies that we brought, because that was a bigger issue than the small family with Norrie disease. I mean, there was maybe 16 individuals in the family with Norrie disease, but we had hundreds of patients wanting just vascular disease support, because peripheral vascular disease is a common ailment that's unrelated necessarily to inherited predisposition. And so I think, all of a sudden you start to realize that there are bigger issues, and the question I asked earlier about newborn screening, we're all excited about genomic newborn screening, but at the end of the day, it does no good if you can't treat those patients and intervene and have a better outcome. And so I think as we think about the international landscape and the criticality of data sharing and collaboration, we also have to think about the fact that the priorities in each country, in each village, and each community are very different sometimes, and you really have to sort of make sure you're thinking about the sometimes more direct needs of other places. When we were working with the H3 Africa community, we quickly discovered they just needed basic tools in genomic analysis, and we have a free software platform called Seeker. And so we've been doing workshops on how to use Seeker, because it's free and open source and anybody can use it without paying fees. And just basic tools like that are useful long before you start teaching them how to share data, right? So I think it's really important to just be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what the needs of that community are. I also am constantly envious of other healthcare systems in other countries compared to the US. And some days I think about leaving the US if we can't get our shall I say, our shit together here.
Yeah. You're obviously a woman in science. I'm just curious about, and you have had a brilliant career and you've still got this amazing trajectory. And I'm sure you've got your own experience and you've observed how other people have navigated, their times through their career. Do you have advice for the female scientists here in the room who are either starting out or mid-career or what have you? There's probably no piece of magic, but what would you tell your younger self?
My younger self.
What to do or not do, or what to think about?
Yes. So, I think one thing that I see as a challenge of many women in, not just in science, but honestly any career path, is that balance of family versus career. And, just often, and you certainly saw this in the pandemic, women ending up taking more of that burden. And from my perspective, one thing that was really important to me is to make sure that my partner was an equal contributor to our family. And so if you can back out now, back out now. If they're not an equal contributor, find someone else. Because I can say that my success is in part due to my husband, who shepherded, when I was traveling and working late nights and all of the commitments. He picked up the slack, and that allowed me to be successful. And now, at some point it was a little imbalanced, and one of the tricks of the trade that I learned was to convince him to find a hobby that he could spend his time on, and so he took up competitive cycling, and that led him to have to train every evening and go to races on the weekends, and so I would pick up the slack on the weekends to watch our kids, and the evenings while he was out racing, and then he would pick up the slack during the week while I was out traveling and working late, and it became a balance in our relationship and our, rearing our children when they were young, and they take up a lot of your time. And so it was really about finding that balance that allowed me to be able to still focus on my career, but also, share that burden equally between the two of us. And not a burden. I love my children, and it was the best decision I made. But it's a lot of work, and you have to figure out how to do it. But to just that message that you can do it. I have 2 children, and they're wonderful, and I prioritize quality over quantity. And so I made sure I was there when my kids needed me. But and they are a joy to my life, and some days are harder than others, but you can do it no matter what, and don't tell anybody you can't, because you can balance those things in ways that you can, develop your career. And I will also say that one thing I often see from women is a lack of confidence in recognizing that you are just as smart as anyone else out there, and you can do it. And sometimes you just have to pretend you know what you're doing. And actually not pretend you know what you're doing, but pretend you're not scared, and pretend that you're not unsure, right? And stand up there and be confident in what you're saying and what you're doing, because you do know what you're doing just as much as anybody else. And I will say that I can remember there were senior people when I was a junior person that were maybe not as, what term shall I use? Like very, very aggressive, like dominating the presence. And when I disagreed with them, I stood up and I said so. I said, actually, I don't think that's right. And I would stand up for my perspective. And that was a little scary when you're around senior people, is to stand up for what you think when it's different than what they think. But I found that quickly over time, in doing that and putting out my opinions in strong ways and standing behind that, they quickly started to respect me and then offer me up for opportunities to be in leadership roles over time. But that was because I stuck my neck out there for what I believed in and what I thought was the right answer or the right approach or the right thing. And so I think a lot of the opportunities that I got over time was because I took that. I was strong with what I thought, and I exuded confidence even when I wasn't always 100% confident. But don't wing it. Like you have to know what you're talking about. But that was something that I found was really helpful to my career, is just going for it, right? And not being like, yeah, I probably don't know what I'm talking about. Well, if that's the way you act, people are going to think you don't know what you're talking about. So don't step back. Don't make excuses for yourself. If you know what you're talking about, talk about it.
That's great. Okay, so shall we Slido up? I think we've, or shall I keep quizzing?
Is there any good Slidos coming through? There you go.
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask you the ones for you, and you can ask the ones for me. Ewan, if you could go back 5 years, what would you do differently?
5 years or 7 years when I started GA4GH, when I engaged with GA4GH. What would I do differently? I mean, gosh, as written, that's a really rather open-ended question, but let's scope it to GA4GH. I think I would. What would I have done? I would have got. I think I'd try to get the kind of the very often, yes, we're going to put GA4GH on the roadmap. I would have somehow got some commitment, some like harder commitment. And we've kind of messed around with that a little bit with the committed, driver projects must commit this. And then the assigned experts, I think, is our next kind of call, because it's about money and priorities. But a number of people, a number of organizations said, right, yeah, it's definitely on our roadmap, we're right behind the standards and stuff like that. And I think we should have held people a bit harder somehow, some process. And the other thing, which is, I think, something for you, Heidi, to work through is, we've got 44 GA4GH standards. That makes it really quite easy for anybody to put their hand up and say, I implement GA4GH standards. In fact, because BAM, CRAM, VCF are GA4GH standards, you actually can't do genomics without using GA4GH standards. So everybody can kind of tick the box, and yet we want to get them to this next step. And because we didn't really describe that maybe minimal GA4GH standards, we've had a number of attempts at that. And we didn't, it's clearer now that our inability to express that has meant that we've got an inability to hold people to that next stage. Maturity ladders are sometimes used here, these sorts of things. I think we missed a trick there. But I commend the next chair for this. Right, this is for you, Heidi. 3 years from now, what are the 2 or 3 indicators will you use to evaluate GA4GH progress?
Yeah, I think in that case, it's starting to see the standards that we're using implemented widely, including in places where they aren't like people who have always been part of our team. That things are instantiated in ways that everybody's really using, or a lot of people are using, and we're actually accomplishing science, right? It's not like, well, I've shown that, I've demonstrated that we can put these standards in place, and we can get from point A to point B, and 10 groups have implemented it. But the question is, do they actually solve something from implementing it, right? And so I think I really want to be able to look at each standard that we've put out there and show that it's enabling science or medicine or both, and that there are groups using it that aren't the people that show up at every Global Alliance meeting, but go beyond the community that are our closest people here. And I think those things will really show that we've been able to make a difference. What's most surprised you about the last 10 years of both Global Alliance and genomics bioinformatics?
Yeah. So for genomics, I was surprised at the T2T assemblies. That suddenly happened, I mean, I kind of knew that we were heading in this direction with long reads, but I just didn't realize it was going to come together so quickly. And I remember when I think I first talked to either Karen or Adam somewhere. It's kind of, it was also all pandemic-y, so it was all Zoomy. And they said, yeah, we can get through the centromeres, and we're going to tackle, the really hard thing is the ribosomal repeats. I was like, bloody hell, you can get through the centromeres. I mean, Jesus. And for me, I was around, before the draft human genome was done. I knew, I really knew just what a nightmare some of these nightmare regions were, and just how ambiguous they are. So to be in a situation where we've got the technology to fill it out. So I really feel that it's almost like 2020, I don't know, I can't remember when TTT came out, 2021? Yeah, to 2021. It's almost like that 20-year endpoint of the reference human genome. We've now got the technology for these complete genomes. And brilliantly, it's cheap enough for us to do, to think about, 700 really good reference quality things. So that's been amazing. That was a surprise. I think the thing I'm really excited, lots of from here as well, has been AI. I've definitely gone on this kind of journey of AI, of thinking that it was a bit like dressed up machine learning, and then being skeptical because you can interrogate the model, you didn't have a model, and so this kind of annoying thing where it felt like a black box. And now I've really got to the point where I'm like, it's just such a good fit to biology. Most of biology is kind of some non-linear function. The idea that everything's linear and orthogonal, I mean, it's just crazy. It's just not how biology works. And I've really started to sort of always reach for the AI modeling solution, and much more confident that you can then, once you've created an AI model that does what you want, you can then pick it apart and pull it apart and look under the hood and see, kind of get some insight about why it is doing what it's doing. So those have been recent. What about you? What has surprised you? Oh, can I say the final thing on that? It's been a total pleasure being a non-executive director of Genomics England. So for the people who don't know, this is the Department of Health, so the UK government's kind of sole provider for whole genomes through contracts, and then the informatics that they run. Augusta and Rich are here in the audience. And they have taken, Genomics England has gone from a research project that was a kind of proof of principle with sequencing 100,000 people from the UK with the clinical feedback into routine use inside of the NHS. And that, because I see the inside, I know the frantic paddling of the feet underneath, and the mess and the complications and all the things that Genomics England can do better. But when I take a step back and say that number of diagnoses are being made to that number of people, I was really proud of Genomics England. I mean, I obviously don't, I'm sort of cheerleading, as they've really cracked into cancer as well. We haven't talked about cancer much yet. But that's, it's a very hard nut, actually, because the timelines are much faster, cancer is much more complicated, the kind of output to the clinician is a much more rare disease is complicated enough, but cancer, just like some of the situations, are mind-blowing. And so they've really, they've really got their arms around rare pediatric cancers and rarer cancers, and you can see where that's going. And so seeing my own research, because I've been involved with the human genome and genomics for so long, there is something really powerful seeing it, getting all the way to changing people's lives. We saw this Luxtrana I probably mangled the name, the gene therapy for the RPE65 loss of
Yes.
function. I mean, it's brilliant. We diagnose these kids, we give them a gene therapy, and they don't go blind. I mean, what is not to like about that story? So powerful to see that. And it is a passion of mine to see every country take up the opportunity that's in front of them, particularly the countries in Europe, but every country to take up the opportunity of helping their citizens be healthier, live better lives. I think that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you like to give, well, I don't know. Yeah, would you like to give an answer to that one?
Yeah, I think what was so surprising to me when we started the ClinGen project and started working with NCBI on the ClinVar database, the idea that we would convince commercial clinical labs to share their data was just a far reach in my brain. I was like, we have to do this, but how in the world can I convince them to do this? And it's just amazing to me that we did it, and that now 96% of data in ClinVar is from clinical labs, most of them commercial labs, and that we could, really establish this pre-competitive space of data sharing and allow that to happen, even though they all still compete with each other on services and testing and the typical things that commercial entities prioritize, but they also prioritize and understand the importance of the pre-competitive data sharing, and that we have to do that to give accurate results to patients. And although it was everything I was focused on, the fact that we actually managed to make it happen was amazing to me. And I still to this day am like, how did we do this? So I think that's probably the thing that surprised me most pleasantly.
It's worth, again, reminding people that I think this century really is going to be the century of biology. I can really feel that in here. There was, I think we've got some. So I'm as excited about the next 10 years, and I can get a little bit jaded sometimes because I feel like sometimes we have, some of these problems are old problems, and some of these problems are, kind of very incremental gains. But then you have to step back and you have to look at this in the round and see how far you've come, and that really does excite me hugely. Yeah. Right. For Heidi, what is the disruptive angle of your vision for the next 6 years of GA4GH?
That's a good question. I can't necessarily say that there's a major disruptive angle I've come up with yet, but I do think there's some areas of focus that might shift a bit. Obviously, as we've talked about, the importance of implementation and really being able to define projects, even if it's not Global Alliance that's really doing them, funding them, but we are convening and we are facilitating and making sure that all of those that participate in the standards development are then part of the implementation, and that we are helping make that happen. And I think that just does have to be a critical component. I also think that a deeper emphasis on the clinical side of things, so that we can sort of see our work from end to end, and that could be both clinical research as well as true clinical medicine, but really, having some more footprint in the clinical space, working closely with our colleagues in HL7 and with fire standards and other things so it's not like we're gonna be doing it all, but there is a lot that I think we can do in terms of ensuring that we're reaching that sort of true implementation and impact side of things. So I think, and my comment earlier about asking you your thoughts about endorsement of other standards, I think that is something that I would like to see and bring to the table. So it really emphasizes that there's no competition here. We're all working together. There are things that these groups are doing and those groups are doing, and this is how our standards work together to deliver a better product. So I think those are some of the things that I will have some focus on over the coming years in terms of really pushing on that, but also really, international data sharing efforts that can show the benefit of the need for the data everywhere. And I think that's one thing that I think is not quite there. You made the comment, we have the standard there, but nobody's using it. We have to demonstrate why they need to use it, right? And that their science is going to be better if they can federate their analyses and take data from all of these data sets, as opposed to just doing their analysis in one data set, whether it be the UK Biobank or all of us. No, it'll be better if you can do it on both, right? And I think in working with the scientific community to be able to emphasize the benefit and the opportunity of federating their analysis, then we will prove the utility and the need for the standards that we develop.
Cool.
Kind of hit the next one already.
Yeah, I think, yes, I agree with that. I think the next one from David, you've done.
How can the Alliance have the same impact on new methods of collaboration, such as federated analysis?
Yeah.
You want to take that one?
I mean, I do think, something that I think has become clearer and we've gone with the grain is that we respect the legalities and ethics and sovereignty of data, and we expect data to be in silos, of which the largest is probably national. Maybe the European Union could come up with a transnational silo, but in some sense it would be a kind of federated, it's much more likely to be federated. And so I think we have bought into that deep concept of federated. I think where this is going is twofold. As I've mentioned, there's actually not that many environments. I was really heartened today to see that there are environments that implement these different components like DERS, but we've got a tool which I'd love to do some federated analysis with. We've actually not managed to run it in two places, or we've only kind of run it by hand in different places. So I think there's a real simple goal to get over first. But then there's another goal, which is kind of federated learning, closer to that model sharing and stuff like that, where you do need to think about covariates, a much more sophisticated aspect of federated learning, transfer learning, this sort of thing. And there you can see the machine learning people and the AI people thinking about these concepts theoretically, thinking about how you do batch control or cohort control, however you like to call it, whilst not having exposure to the data jointly. And I think we need to bridge to those people who are coming with the analytic machine learning AI skills and technologies, and then we have the in-practice data. In practice, you can get hold of the Danish Copenhagen Blood Bank, the UK Biobank, all of us, and the Biobank of Japan, and you won't go mad trying to get your code to port to all four places. And because of that, you can do a much more interesting piece of federated analysis. But this goes, I think, to your business of making it kind of concrete and real. Do you know what I mean? The standards and the usage there. So I think it's an opportunity. And so we're some way down the road already, but there's much more road that we need to travel. Right. I'll take the third one now. For Heidi, what could GA4GH be doing better to effectively engage and support nascent national genomic initiatives from low and middle income countries?
Yeah, so I alluded to this a little bit before in the sense that we can't just step in and say, how are you going to share your data? Well, they may still be in the early stages of generating the data, and their highest motivation is actually doing something with the data in their country, whether it's actually interpreting variation for clinical purposes or doing basic research on that data. So we have to be willing to help with the things that they want the most, that will give the most benefit to the science and the individuals in those areas, before we can expect to then say, and can you also share the work you're doing? Also, you know, there's often, you know, concern over, because of past, you know, history, over what the intentions are of others using data and, you know, potential for harm. And so it will take time of really working with other countries to demonstrate the benefits, both for their own countries and others around the world, and how that data sharing. You know, I often give the example of when I'm interpreting variation for a patient in the US, some of the data that's most helpful to me is from other countries, underrepresented in particular, where there's high allele frequencies in those populations, and I can rule out a variant as pathogenic and call it benign because it's in 10% of X population. The same reverse is true. If you are in Africa and you're interpreting a variant that's rare there, but you look over to the US and see that it's in 10% of European individuals, then you can rule it out. And so really trying to help understand that benefit of international data sharing, but also help develop the platforms and the tools to allow them to do the science, do the diagnostics, do that work. And then I think in that way, we will all be better able to engage and benefit each other.
I mean, something that I've, you know, discovered, I think, over time is that you gave that example of Costa Rica about the different priorities. And I think also we must have space to listen and listen to what low and middle income countries kind of want. And very often their list of priorities is really like, comes from like a very different starting point. And I think definitely being in a place where we can, you know, the interaction is an interaction of peers, you know, recognizing differences and you know, differences in the ability of money and delivery and some other things, but fundamentally intellectually of peers. I think some of that is a really important part to start, and that I've been surprised, you know, just what the order of how the order of the conversation comes out when you come at it from a different perspective. So I think that's going to be part of it. I don't think this is a one, you know, do you know what I mean? I don't think there's like you wake up one morning and like, this is how we do it. That's right. And then it works. You've got to try a lot of different ways, and you've got to be adaptable to the situation. Yeah. Right. Oh, is this the countdown?
It is. We got the videos.
So we should,
whenever you run out of steam, and we can always answer the questions.
Okay, I'm going to make one comment on the question that's at the top about keeping people engaged. So one thing that I think is important that we've started doing in Global Alliance is there's a tendency when you've got, you know, a great leader of a work stream to just, you know, keep them in place forever and keep leaning on them. And there's this assumption, well, no one else can do this, I need to stay here and do it. But then you get burnout and that sort of thing. And I think it's important that we have broad outreach and call out for volunteers who want to take on these leadership roles. And we think about, you know, turnover of leadership, because, you know, it is important to keep people engaged when you have fresh ideas and fresh people. And as we've been doing that broader call out for workstream chairs and co-leads and driver projects, you get new, you know, engagement, excitement, new ways of thinking about things, and other areas of focus. And I think that is going to be critical to continuing to keep ourselves alive and active and innovating and that sort of thing. So you'll continue to see that of the, you know, outreach to all of you. And if you know, I encourage everyone to step in and engage and bring others into the environment so that we can keep those new, fresh ideas going in the system. But,
so I'd like to take number 3 there. Ewan, do you think GA4GH has done a good job living up to its global name. So I think we did a better job than 2012, 2014, 2015, but I don't think we're doing a good job. I don't think we are living the true G, the first G, in the way that we want to be. I'm proud of trying to stretch, make that much more real. The people in the Secretariat know I kind of rage against our Anglo. So I have a phrase, Anglo, the kind of native English-speaking countries have found it very easy to engage. And I think there's a number of reasons why. I think one is sort of a shared common culture. I think something that you often forget, it's very easy to forget when you're in an English-speaking country. The international language of science is English, but the way medicine is practiced is absolutely in the country's native language. And so the leading clinicians in Japan speak Japanese, the leading clinicians in Germany speak German, the leading clinicians in French speak French. And so there's an extra barrier when you move away from into an English-speaking country where you have both the research and clinical kind of cultural barriers, and then you have, in addition, a stronger language barrier. So I think we have to double down on that. We've got cultural things, we've got these language things, we've got welcoming doors, and then we've got that low and middle income, the disparity of resources that people have access to. So no pressure, Heidi. I look forward to seeing your leadership in this area. But I'm right behind you.
Excellent. You're still emeritus chair, I remind you. I'll be calling upon you. Should we wrap? Okay.
Okay. So now we've got some videos.
Videos.
With sound. Is it promised?
Yeah. So I hope we've got videos with sound. I hope we're going to hear from our first and second chair. I would point out for some of those questions, Ewan's still got another 3 months and 15 days or something
I'm off now.
to get stuff done. So if there's some of those things he can knock off the list before he hands over to Heidi. Can we try those videos?
My name is Tom Hudson. I'm Chief Scientific Officer at AbbVie. I served as GA4GH's second chair from 2015 to 2016. Ewan, we've known each other since the start of the Human Genome Project. I also know we evolved together because we ran a workshop on data sharing in Toronto and wrote the data sharing principles for sharing clinical information. And eventually, of course, we got together and with many others, which are here at this meeting, start GA4GH. I like your spirit, I like your leadership. Thank you so much. I think at its heart, GA4GH is about the clinician, the physician, learning to make decisions in a new world where there's lots of data. So it's not just about genomics, it's about lots of data. In the future, the patient's data, clinical data, genomics data, it's going to be compared to large data sets in a large ecosystem that's going to say these are patients that look more like this patient, that they responded well to this drug, or they had a side effect because of this genotype. But for this to work, you need to have very good computer systems, very good data sets to help them make that decision. That's what GA4GH is about. It's about creating that data ecosystem that's going to help the physician make better decisions for the patient. Heidi, the first time we met was at a GA4GH meeting, and I remember how much you embodied the patients, their thinking, their needs. I'm so happy you're the leader. Good luck on your term.
My name is David Altschuler, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. But more relevant to today, I was the founding chair of GA4GH from 2013 to 2015. 10 years ago, recognizing the growing importance of genomic and health data, a group of international leaders came together to discuss how we would bring data together across sectors and across nations in an ethical manner to try and advance human health. GA4GH grew out of this discussion, and together have brought forward a framework of ethics and privacy and responsible use, have brought together technical frameworks to try and facilitate responsible data sharing, and have performed pilot projects to try and demonstrate the value of genomic data and data sharing to improve human health. As I reflect on the last 10 years, I realized that when we first started this effort together, we were thinking about what might happen. But today, it is happening. Genomic tests are part of medicine every day. Genomic-inspired therapies are being used and bringing benefit to people with cancer and rare diseases and increasingly common diseases. And as I look to the future, it's clear this will only become more true. The importance of GA4GH is to bring together people from government, academia, nonprofits, and companies to work together to make sure this is done in a responsible and ethical manner and with as much benefit as can be achieved. I couldn't be more proud to see the work that you've all done. I want to thank Ewan Birney for his superb leadership as chair, and I'm particularly excited to congratulate Heidi Rehm, as the incoming chair. I've known Heidi for many, many years, and I can't think of a better person to lead GA4GH into the future. Finally, I want to thank and congratulate Peter Goodhand. From the very earliest days, thinking about how we would bring together the first group, to today, 10 years later, Peter has led this organization through changes in leadership, through changes in structure, and as the field of genomics and medicine have evolved rapidly, and GA4GH would not be here today without Peter's excellent leadership. Congratulations and happy birthday to everyone.
So that explains why when I asked staff, are the videos okay? They just said yes. So a few more slides, and you guys just stay there. So I'd like to, in closing, I think we've had 2 days of Connect, 2 and a bit days of plenary. We've covered an incredible range, and if you just look at the speakers represented, tremendous cross-section from the deeply technical to the deeply human and everything in between. And I share Ewan's perspective. We're not anywhere near as global as we need to be and as we will be. But I think when we look at our speakers, we're starting in a post-COVID world to get more breadth of coverage around the world. Also like to thank, we've heard from David, but David wasn't doing this alone. There's a very good and engaged program committee. And the way the coherence of the meeting, the way it hung together, owes a lot to this group and the work they've done. Also want to make sure we thank our funders. This meeting wouldn't happen, or it would be a lot more expensive for you without the support of the funders, both in the work we do in the meetings, but also year-round. This community of funders was not there right at the very, very beginning. It was the host institutes. But as we demonstrated more and more value, the funders got very strongly behind us. And we've been really pleased to see so many of them in the room with us. Some upcoming dates for those of you involved in Connect, and I would encourage you to get the dates in your calendar. And I would also, when we open registration, to register as soon as you can. It will be Ascona, Switzerland, in April of next year. And 1 year or more or less from today, we will be in the GA4GH 12th Plenary, this time in Melbourne, Australia. And as Catherine and colleagues know, it is a really long way. You have to think well ahead. You have to plan, book early, book your flights early. And we look forward to seeing as many of you as possible. And also having even more representation from Australasia and Asia in Melbourne next year. Oops, no, back. Okay, I added something before that. Although I thank the sponsors, this meeting would not happen without the GA4GH staff making it work. And in particular, Angela, who you've seen a lot of, and Justina, who you haven't seen a lot of, but the whole of the GA4GH staff too. it is definitely the most fun and the most committed staff team I've ever had the honor of working with. Now, one more thank you. This time back to you, Ewan. You could guess what was coming since you saw the pictures. Ewan in action all over the year. Look at the very young Ewan. I don't know.
10 years ago.
Catherine and I haven't changed, but Ewan's aged rapidly. It must be like being president of the United States. You age at double the rate. A great memory for me was the fireside chat in Orlando with Harold Varmus and Francis Collins, and of course Barcelona at the bottom. Toronto, top left, with the GA4GH Connect meeting that managed to find its way to a ship and sail around the harbour. And I think that's Rishi down the bottom right. Yeah. And you obviously involved in some very geeky, nerdy conversation with David Hausler in the middle. Ewan, we have, if you remember, I think it was Basel, you gave a reward, champagne and chocolates, to the very first standard that came out of GA4GH Connect. That was a bottle of champagne and chocolates for one standard. Keeping it modest, we're going to do exactly the same. For all your contributions to all our standards. We did think about a case, but we decided you'd never be able to get back into England.
Thank you. Perfect.
You want to say anything? No? You said enough?
I think I've said enough. I think, anyway, it has been a great pleasure to be both part of this community and for people to trust in my leadership. I often joke that I kind of got dragged into the job, as Peter knows, and I kind of fixed Peter with a beady eye at the start. I said, okay, I'm going to do it, but just be careful, I'm going to make changes.
Be very disruptive.
Be very disruptive, were those the words? I don't know. And I actually don't think I've made that much change. Well, maybe I have. Yeah. But it's been a real pleasure, and I've met lots of different and new people, and I've met lots of perspectives. Heidi, you have my support. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the next 6 years of GA4GH under your leadership.
Thank you.
So bear with me for just a few more minutes to close. I was inspired by Patrick's use of a story and the power of stories today, and so I added a couple of slides. It's another story. This one is started in 1987. It's a 30-year-old mother of 3 young children. She took her husband's hand and placed it on her abdomen and said, "What do you think this is?" He said, "I don't know, but it's not good." She went through 4 months of total misdiagnosis and was told she had a benign liver hemangioma in New Jersey. Moved to Canada and got a partially correct diagnosis that she had a carcinoid tumor. In one day at the Mayo Clinic, she was fully accurately diagnosed by a world expert in carcinoid tumors that what she really had was a non-functioning islet cell carcinoma. Good news, there was a new treatment protocol. Bad news, nobody had lived more than 3 years with that protocol, but otherwise it was incurable. Thanks to the treatment, patient had the longest survival to date, more than 3 years. 5 years later, she relapsed. First oncologist had passed away when they went back to the Mayo Clinic. His colleague understood it, took over. There was a modified treatment protocol because the first treatment had pretty much killed the patients it was used on. Year 12, he returned to the Mayo Clinic. The second oncologist had also passed away. Less successful treatment attempts. And after 12 years, the patient passed away, leaving her now teenage children to navigate life without her. Not quite sure that's exactly what was supposed to come up next, but the patient's husband was clearly her navigator through all that incredible 12 years of challenge. He became, the recognized that the expert knowledge was highly localized in one hospital in one country. There was almost no knowledge about that ultra-rare 1 in 2 million patients cancer that most oncologists would rarely see in their lifetime. Most of that knowledge disappeared with 2 oncologists. The only really global knowledge sharing about that condition was in a couple of papers and a book chapter, and it stopped there. The real expertise was in these human heads. That patient navigator, by the end of that 12 years, knew more about non-functioning islet cell carcinoma than most oncologists, because they would never see that patient. So that story that I've just told you now was actually told probably 100 times to tens of thousands of cancer researchers, volunteers, donors over the next 10 years. But fast forward to January 28, 2013, that story was told to 49 genomic and data scientists meeting in New York City, which included Bartha, Michael Dunn, and Nikki, who were here. And that story was, obviously, you probably guessed by now, that story was my story, it was my contribution. And what David Altshuler asked me to do is explain to the group, because I couldn't explain genomics or data science because I didn't know anything about either of the subjects, but the why. Why was this important? Why did we need to do it now? Why do we need to do it globally? And the importance of it. So that was my personal contribution to the meeting and what has inspired me to do this work ever since. It's been a great privilege and an honor to do it with all of you. Particularly with Ewan, because he's been, we've been partners in this journey together, and I'm equally committed and enthusiastic about doing it with Heidi and taking us to that truly global organization and making a difference for all humans, not just ones in the countries that get the benefit today. So to all of you, thank you for your contributions over the past decade. Look forward to working with you as we move forward. And with that, we're closed, and safe travels. And let's get back and do some more work. Thank you.
I only took this job because I knew Peter was staying. Thank you, Peter, for all you do.